Stay tuned later in the video for a word from our sponsor. The few soldiers who still lived went searching for him and found him stretched in bestial sleep in a clump of thick shrubbery. Full gorged he was with human blood from his last victim. Now it was well known that a vampire, like a great serpent, when well gorged, falls into a deep sleep and may be taken without peril. They were at a loss as to how to dispose of the monster, for how may the dead be slain? For a vampire is a man who has died long ago, yet is quick with a certain foul unlife. This video is dedicated to our first ever Venmo donation from Andrew, who we will keep the last name of private, as he donated in the shadows of the night. Andrew requested more Conan lore and something that relates to the world of darkness. The literary history of vampires in Conan comes to us from a combination of Robert E. Howard's vampire characters, elements of the Cthulhu mythos, and classic weird fiction Marvel. As vampires in old Marvel are a combination themselves of copying Howard's demons, the classic Bram Stoker's Dracula, and obviously later World of Darkness influenced sects functioning as the bloodlines of the universe, this was a great match. While some sects wouldn't exist until far after the Hyborian Age, we've selected the 10 that are alive in the 10,000 BC setting, many of which fill a special niche in the Conan universe. Now use your love for life to stay after death as we begin. Grimdark.
Half off!
Long before the time of Conan, there existed a man of similar destiny, born to a savage tribe who would rule over a civilized people. In this Thurian age of brutal war and demon-shadowed sorcery, Kull of Atlantis would become the ruler of Great Valusia. Using his mighty power over Valusia's armies, he would launch a war of extermination on the wicked wizards who tormented his people, and, like any great man, make many powerful enemies. Chief among these was his archenemy, the dark mage of Elder Night, known only as Thulsa Doom. Once he had finally vanquished the villain, an assemblage of his followers demanded retribution. They sought out scrolls written by an ancient Acheronian god of chaos known as Chthon, the Eater of Weak Souls. With this knowledge, they hoped to ascend into becoming powerful demons in their own right. Among the partakers in this trans-mortal ambition was an abnormally genius and skilled necromancer known as Varnae. What made him most abnormal was the fact that Varnae himself was a Gigantolopithecus, a giant ape whose intellect and natural magical ability were likely from the same unknowable source. After being mortally wounded by King Kull, the great ape would volunteer to be the first to undergo the ritual of ascension to demonhood. After seemingly dying during the process, he was buried in a coffin filled with blood. Over the course of 3 days, the demonic corruption, his own slowly re-emerging talent in necromancy, as consciousness would return to him, and blood, which nourished him, would act as the womb for an entire monster lineage. After his rebirth, he could not be called a demon, for the master demonologists of the inner circle he belonged to could not control him, nor could he be called a mindless undead, for his intellect was retained, if not dramatically enhanced with telepathic prowess, able to resurrect those he slew into his followers, and subsisting on the blood of mortals, which aided in his resurrection. Varnae became the first and most powerful vampire over 10,000 years before the age of Conan. The rest of Thulsa Doom's followers, fearing reprisals from Varnae for trying to control him, repeated this process, creating the vampires today known as Ancients. From the high ranking of these Ancients would be the unique individuals who functioned as the high priests of the Blood Ape and invented the backstabbing nature of vampire politics. There was Sarikhan the Pict, and his servant simply called Boy. Nosferatu, who can be best theorized to already have been a herald or half-demon by ritual of Nergal, given his bat-like demonic appearance, Lamia, who was considered the greatest of the high priests and was named the first vampire lord among her kind, Marakan, whose trademark 4 fangs would mark his descendants, who most likely include the vampire from 1935's Horror on the Mound, where our opening quote today is from, and Verdale, who would become the most devout fanatic of Varnae. This circle of sorcerers were not the only people turned, however, and any vampire turned at this time is far more unique, mysterious, and powerful, often spawning their own vampire lineages, which again, even in the time of Conan, would be anywhere respectively between 8 and 10,000 years old. This was the case for Princess Akivasha of Stygia, who very likely is the progenitor of the Siren Sect, given her hunting patterns being a female vampire focusing obsessively on athletic male victims. While these figures would all try to assassinate each other at one time or another, there were many countless unnamed ancients who would all be slain by Varnae for trying to overthrow him and start their own sects by turning mortals. As we know, all those killed by Varnae come back as powerful vampires loyal to him. One thing that makes Varnae so unique is that this is also true for vampires, likely due to his natural talent in necromancy and genius-level intellect even before becoming a vampire. The first and only true civil war of vampire kind until far after the time of Conan would end with Varnae solidifying his rule by resurrected blood over the majority of all other sects of vampires. While retaining their original strengths and weaknesses, they all possess the same psychic loyalty to the figure, who at this point could easily be called their king. King Varnae would survive the sinking of his native Atlantis by filling his giant stone coffin with blood which sank to the bottom of the sea. From here, he governs the vast majority of vampire kind, telepathically guiding their actions subconsciously and consciously through his priests. This is why, to understand vampires in general and the rules which govern them, we must understand the most potent of their bloodlines, that of the Varnaeans. Varnaeans are the term we'll be using to describe mainstream vampire society, and would one day be the bloodline of Dracula, long after the Hyborian Age. They are governed by the rules one classically associates with the monsters in question. They are repelled by any religious symbol when tied with true faith that belongs to a religion which existed before their mortal birth. They can be killed by fire, burn alive in the sunlight, and can be killed by a wooden stake in the heart. They can also die due to breaking the magical barrier that naturally forms when people live in a family-sized domain long enough for it to be called a home. Entering without an invitation will have a slower but still lethal effect of burning the vampire to death from the inside out. This is easily bypassed through their powers by tricking a mortal into letting them in by means we'll go over very soon. Silver can be used to paralyze vampires if stabbed through their heart, and garlic can be used as a sedative, causing them to become easy to capture or interrogate. Depending on the age of the vampire, they will either turn into a corpse of appropriate age or wither to dust from the ages. They must also travel with soil from their homeland, where they were first turned, as they are slightly weakened by being away from it. This is not a large factor, but the soil does seem to give a feeling of safety to the vampire in question. If they do not possess this, they may be more paranoid, insecure, or act irrationally due to being over-emotional, even for a vampire. One reason it is very likely that Varnae does not resurface despite having more than enough manpower to do so is that being away from Atlantis for too long may cause him to weaken control mentally over other vampires, and possibly make him return to the bestial mindset of his giant ape kindred. While a giant savage demonic undead King Kong out for blood would be a very scary threat, the primary person Varnae would be endangering would be himself. In this way, even Varnae's lack of presence among his children is a political move to retain control over them. Willpower, thus emotional control, is also one of the three main factors for how powerful a vampire is. The other two being how well fed they are, which of course affects mental health in the form of reverting to savagery, and how old they are, which seemingly has no advantage in its own right, but comes with centuries of experience living with the condition. Their turning process is the simple killing of any mortal by draining all of their blood directly, ensuring they resurrect as a vampire in most cases. Of course, this also instills extreme susceptibility to telepathic control from Varnae, who has an inherent knowledge of all of his children, despite his undersea hiding place. Their culture is one of service to the plans of their Dark Father, which seems to simply be to strategically grow the influence and power of his children. For this reason, they are highly selective about who they turn, usually focusing on royalty, already accomplished necromancers like Varnae was, or those with any kind of power in society likely to sympathize with their elitist view of the world. To be a vampire is to be the chosen of Varnae, above all mortals, and destined to rule over them in his kingdom of night. While you must drink the blood of mortals to the same degree as a normal human would eat food to survive, in exchange you can hypnotically control those you drink from, possess mild telepathy in the form of hypnotic suggestion, can take the shape of and control any nocturnal beast smaller than you, such as rats, bats, or wolves, that you feel a deep connection to, are immune to human diseases, possess the strength of 10 to 20 men depending on the vampire, you're incredibly fast, and can heal from wounds that would be lethal to humans within a day. In addition to all of this, in the time of Conan, mainstream vampires would also be skilled in necromancy, taught to them by their sire, as well as demonology in some cases, meaning they would know how to summon zombies and/or demons to their aid. This is due to their hand-me-down culture from the inner circle of Thulsa Doom. A master vampire would likely be a priest of Varnae, commanding other vampires under them, deeply politically connected within a city, allowing them to turn society itself against their adversaries, a master necromancer having hordes of undead under him hidden away somewhere, and a master demonologist, likely having a powerful guardian of some type. A telltale sign of a full-blooded vampire is their inability to cast a reflection, and the usual two fangs from the upper jaw that are an extension of their upper canines. Everything that has been said in this section of the video can be thought to apply to all vampires mentioned here, unless otherwise stated in their respective sections. As we said, these are the most numerous vampires, and as such can be found in any civilized area across the Hyborian continent. All vampire sects loyal to Varnae meet at a summit once every 1,000 years, which at this point in history would be somewhere on an unnamed island off the northwestern coast of the Pictish wilderness. We said before that this was the most potent of the vampire bloodlines. This is because, in addition to being responsible for creating the ancients, it is also responsible for the creation of the two great enemies of vampire kind, which resulted from the extreme life-giving properties of Varnae's blood, even when the turning process is greatly distorted by circumstance. These are the two types of half-vampires. The first type gives us far more insight into how a healthy vampire is born. I'm using very loose terminology here, but when the turning process begins, the necromantic aspect of the vampire effectively provides the undead vessel that houses the demonic aspect, which could be roughly called the vampire's soul. Like heralds, this soul is partially demonic, and due to being brought back to life, parts of it are also missing. The undead blood-sucking part of being a vampire is almost immediate. This is the same, roughly speaking, as raising a freshly dead corpse as a zombie. However, depending on every factor, from level of willpower, bloodline, susceptibility, and 1,000 other things, the demonic aspect of a vampire can take anywhere between a day or a few months to take full root. When this process is interrupted, for any reason, the end result is a husk. A blood-sucking zombie that possesses the powers of a vampire without any willpower or sense of awareness to use them. As a result, they are very weak, and while able to be controlled by Varnae, are still savage, even to all but the vampire that turned them. Vampire husks may be kept in large number as a trap for adventurers, or may be found free-roaming the same night they wake up, until their lack of survival instinct kills them in the sunlight. The second type of vampire is not half-zombie, but truly half-human. Much like we talked about with bullmen in our Minotaurs video, most who go through the process of becoming a Dhampire are simply born dead, or worse yet, born as fetus-like husks that need to be mercifully left out in the sunlight. However, under special circumstances, when the fetus is already fully formed into a baby, and the pregnant mother is turned into a vampire, their child will be born with the strength, speed, healing, and hunger of a vampire, without needing to avoid the sun. They have the powers of a vampire, and none of their weaknesses. These are the creatures known as daywalkers. While naturally being half as strong as a vampire in the sense that they can't shapeshift or use any telepathic abilities, they also possess the vampire hunger that, if engaged in enough, will make them a full-fledged vampire with many of the same weaknesses, but still able to go out in the sun. These are, again, extremely rare, and most of them do not become vampire hunters, but rather very powerful vampires themselves. Even when they are starved, they would simply revert back to their half-vampire form, rather than experiencing death from lack of blood. They tend to be naturally nomadic, and could easily find themselves as the head of their own cult of vampires, as a priest of Varnae, should the telepathic link be established, through the drinking of blood, gifting them with their true potential. If you want to unlock your true potential by establishing a link with eldritch forces of horror, then you'll need this video's sponsor, the Bizarchives. The Bizarchives is an independent company producing weird fiction in the subgenres of cosmic horror, epic fantasy, and sword and sorcery. All subjects we've talked about and will continue to talk about on this channel. If you can't afford a product right now, then for a small price of your email address, you can sign up to the Bizarchives Substack for access to articles on the subjects we all love by journalists who are authors in the genre themselves. This is the Bizarchives. Weird tales of monsters, magic, and machines. Those of you who have been following our community page know that, roughly speaking, half the revenue I've ever earned from doing this stuff has been stolen from me by Skrill and Subscribestar, who are keeping my account locked. But the Bizarchives pretty much swooped in here to save the day, and I can't thank them enough. Now that we've covered mainstream vampires, let's move on to more esoteric sects. As we said, for the most part, these sects are still loyal to mainstream vampire society, but 3 have remained independent. The Sirens are a mainstream part of vampire society, who would at this time operate out of Argos, Shem, and Stygia. The unique thing about them is that they are an all-female sect of vampires that prey on attractive men. Akivasha was likely this sect's progenitor, given her hunting methods, and thus they follow an all-female version of a monarchical structure. Queen Akivasha at the top, nobility under her, ladies of the night under them, and baronesses or landowners under them. Lower-ranking members of this sect may pose as prostitutes or drunken tavern girls to lure their male victims into a false sense of security before draining them dry. Conan resisted the enticing advances of Akivasha in 1935's Hour of the Dragon, that would later be republished in 1950 as Conan the Conqueror. The Adze are a tougher-than-average vampire clan, marked by 2 key mutations which separate them from their parent species. The first is to take on a grayish-black demonic predatory form that is stronger than the average vampire. The second is the sect's natural immunity to the usual stakes to the heart and slight resistance to sunlight, which simply makes them more vulnerable to physical damage. Decapitation is the method Conan himself used in the Black Kingdoms for dealing with one such demon in issue 103 of 1979. The Adze hierarchy acts as a parasite on the Black Kingdoms, Darfar and Kush, copying the existing tribal hierarchies after taking over the tribe by means of brutal nightly warfare. They may also start with killing the chieftain and move downward from there. However, regardless of the method, once fully overtaken, the tribe members that aren't converted are farmed as food for the sect. Whereas the usual vampire enjoys some form of civil structure, the bestial blue-skinned Nosferatu Sect dwells in the caves of Carinthia and other parts of northwestern Hyboria. In issue 155, in The Savage Sword of Conan from 1988, the Cimmerian would use the classic stake method to dive headfirst into the nest of beasts during the day to do away with them. The initial transformation into a Nosferatu results in full glowing red eyes, a mouth filled with rows of shark-like fangs, in addition to the usual vampire eye teeth, and their light blue skin. As they age, they slowly begin to resemble their founder, losing their hair, sleeping upside down like a bat, and frequently practicing bestial cannibalism against other vampires should they get in their way. However, they do still try to be a part of Varnaean society. Their hierarchy is similar to a familial structure, with vampires of the same age being thought of as siblings and elders being seen as father or mother figures. In their infinite hunger, the Nosferatu do not care from where the blood flows, only that it flows. Coming to us from the 1922 Robert E. Howard story, The Horror on the Mound, making it canon in Conan, we encounter a 4-fanged vampire with very unique qualities, separating its bloodline from both mainstream vampire society and Akivasha. Its fang structure marks it as a mutated child of Marakan. Its lineage is outlined to have come from Zingara and the Pictish wilderness by implication of geography. When fully fed, the horror is immune to sunlight, but it does cause it to go into a deep slumber. It's also a gorge feeder like a wolf, and able to pass for human unless starved. When starved, the horror earns its name by resembling a 4-fanged zombie, with the Machiavellian intellect of a serial killer mixed with the hunting instinct of a jaguar. The reason these creatures are so rare is that they can sleep for generations at a time, have nomadic living conditions, are solitary hunters, and while their blood is potent, they don't seem to turn others on purpose. Many horrors are themselves simply in their current position because they tried to hunt one. Their behavior would indicate an independent status from mainstream vampire society, only in the sense that they aren't likely to be knowledgeable about their condition, other than their own survival skills picked up over the years. They also seem to embrace the mental health problems and insanity that come with being away from their native soil, using it as a way to augment their animalistic killer instinct instead of relying on the usual vampire abilities. These truly are horrors of the night. It is best theorized that when a fully developed Deep One became curious about the undersea tomb of Varnae, the first Aqueos vampire was born. In their bloodline exists the inherited memories of their misanthropic founder mixed with the elitism of vampires. Their twisted rituals and confused identities make them a threat to both the worlds of earth and sea. While their first generation is taken from Deep One stock, and their beliefs are an offshoot of the esoteric order of Dagon, their sect comprises many aquatic races. First are the impish faceless ones, who are scaled savage swimming pygmies that, as the name would suggest, have no faces, using their ears alone to sense their surroundings. Second are Deep One hybrids, which, due to the nature of vampirism, remain frozen in their current state, unable to take on a more mature form or grow to the titanic size of Dagon. Lastly, perhaps the most unique, are the human members of the group, which begin to grow webbing around their hands and feet, along with pointed ears when transformed. In the same way that vampires view humans as cattle, the Aqueos see all undersea life, along with humans, as food. While they are best defined as rivals of the Deep Ones, viewing themselves as the best manifestation of Dagon's purpose to convert life into the servants of Cthulhu, this is not the end of their oddities. To become an Aqueos is to undergo the ritual of all-seeing, in which the vampire in question is blinded by having their eyeballs ripped out, welcoming them into the family. This ritual is done in the city they have built under the waves, known as Ryla, after the resting place of their true god, which they will refer to as the Cellar of the Earth. Needless to say, they are very independent, and represent only a slightly less awful threat to Earth's vampires than they do to humans. The other purpose of this ritual is to disfigure the person in question, forcing them to resemble the collective beneath the waves. This is truly a unique circumstance, as unlike every other type of vampire, it is easy to see an Aqueos making a theological argument to a Deep One about turning. After all, to convert the human race, a Deep One has to wait centuries without assured success for the hybrid mating process to continue, but an Aqueos can transfer the ancestral memories, undersea lifestyle, and cultural values of the order much faster, and within under one generation, making it much faster than the Deep One's original plan. However, this of course comes with certain theological hang-ups, even if the Fishman was okay with losing his eyes. One could argue that slowly taking the form of Dagon as they age is part of Cthulhu's divine plan, and messing with that is akin to a crime of nature or whatever Deep Ones consider to be nature. The other issue would be hierarchy. As we will explore when we cover the Deep Ones in Conan, they don't seem to have an official hierarchy, with all viewing themselves as slowly ridding themselves of human culture, which includes concepts like property ownership and organization. Things are referred to as belonging to the people of the sea rather than something being under the control of an individual. The Aqueos, on the other hand, have elders who control their society that look like Deep Ones, as we went over previously, all-seeing priests, the blind priests who undergo the ritual of all-seeing, who lead different groups of them, and cultists under them. The esoteric order of Dagon isn't just an evolutionary adaptation for converting humans into Deep Ones anymore, it's their culture and lifestyle. For this reason, Deep One could see becoming a vampire as a slave-like, impure, or weakness-filled state. This sect is also one of the few that has made a common practice of turning animal life to serve them. This includes giant squids, sharks, and whales. Despite the hold Varnae would usually have over someone turned by him, the unique circumstance of the Aqueos means that they have no veneration or love for him. They often pretend that their origins are simply the origins of Dagon, with no relation whatsoever to the king of all vampires. While just as vicious as mainstream vampires, the Moksha Vampires are monks who walk a path of self-liberation from the hunger through periodic self-starvation. When mixed with meditative practices, these undead force themselves to make the most out of their psychic abilities, causing them in some cases to glimpse into Totha, which is the name for the realm of time in the Hyborian Age. This allows them to see visions of the future mixed with psychedelic flashbacks that come from their lack of sanguine nourishment. This results in vampire prophecies, which are taken very seriously by mainstream Varnian society. Forcing themselves to eat as little as possible and being okay with multiple living situations, it is perhaps the easiest for the Moksha among all vampires to hide away from humanity. However, they can still starve to death if they take this training too far. This organically keeps their members quite low as a sect. The Moksha do not fear the hunger, for it, like all pain, is merely an illusion. Their neighbors to the north are the Charniputra of the Himalayan mountains. Much like the Nosferatu, these are cave-dwelling bestial vampires, but unlike their subterranean cousins, these gargoyle-like beasts prefer the mountains of the world. Their natural wings allow them to spend most of their time in the air, and often shapeshift into much larger creatures than their less savage contemporaries. The most favored of these is a giant vampire bat, large enough to carry around 7 to 10 of their kind on its back. While they do burn in the sunlight, this takes slightly longer than for most, as another feature of this bloodline is their tougher hides, able to take much more physical damage in general than other vampires. They are a part of mainstream vampire society, and while the largest concentration of them are in the Himalayan mountains, they will migrate to other places based on plentifulness of food, as well as mountain ranges in that area. Like the Nosferatu, they have a simple family-like structure that verges more on the animalistic. Assassins and warriors, the Claw Sect of modern Tehran view themselves as the protectors of the vampire world. While a part of mainstream vampire society, they serve Varnae out of an honor culture like respect, and will likely not care about the status of other vampires if they view them as endangering their kind. Their claim to fame is their sense of justice, stealth ability, and swordsmanship. Like the Sirens and Moksha, their differences come from their lifestyle. In this case, there is a heavy focus on fighting ability and skill, as they literally train to take out the enemies of the vampire race, including, as mentioned previously, many vampires themselves. Little is known about their hierarchy, but they do operate like a hunting party when in action, usually having a strategist giving the others directions telepathically. Yikki Onna are the vampires of modern Lemuria, which is a fraction of its Thurian size, and Kitai. These vampires have hyper-specialized the mist form into a blizzard-like storm or tornado, which is their primary way of hunting. As the cold undead winds cut your flesh, you slowly become nothing more than a bleeding piece of meat. They are another part of mainstream society, and thus have nothing more separating them than their lifestyle and special blizzard form skill from other Varnaeans. While that finishes our coverage of undead true vampires, just like with our 8-man video, we have included a section ordered in degree of weirdness of creatures that might come up when talking about this subject. Dark Templars are those individuals who have undergone a self-focused ritual similar to heraldry but towards nothingness, and as a result have a hole in their soul that empowers them as life force vampires. While they may also be skilled in blood magic, especially if they want to disguise themselves as a true vampire, they are human in most ways. It's important to remember that their vampirism is not a necessity, but a power that can be used at will. Their half-souled nature also gives them certain instinctive abilities, like accelerated healing, self-warding to protect against weaker spells, and the ability to psychically attack with parasitic force against their enemies. Those who follow this path are not usually the same political stock of undead vampires, but instead are mercenaries or soldiers looking to get a supernatural edge on their opponents by increasing their abilities magically. Many most likely come across the process of becoming a half-demon in their research and think they can practice the ritual or cheat the system by doing it on themselves, which would be one way of becoming a Dark Templar. Another is, of course, to purposely undergo the ritual. If a player wants to be a daywalker like Blade, the Templar is a much safer option. This has the flavor of a vampire without the bad aftertaste of being far too different from the rest of the party or an angry mob coming after you. Nergal is the Shemite lord of the underworld, and he has 2 races of servants in the form of bat-like entities, both of which have made it to this list. The first are the Shadows of Nergal, also simply called Bat Demons. These creatures are very much demon beasts, as they do not seem to have higher sentience. They can find their ways to Earth by being summoned by a demonologist, escaping the Outer Dark, or heraldically bonding itself to a vampire bat, causing the transformation into a demon beast. An element that would be very fun to play with is the idea of Nergal-controlled bat demons attacking vampires, as they are undead and have avoided the underworld. A fight between these entities and the Charniputra would be fun to watch. The devil beasts of Nergal are the spectral sister race of their demon beast brothers. The title of devil in Conan lore is usually given to demonic entities that have bonded and adapted to specific parts of nature. In the case of these creatures, as they come from the realm of the dead, they have become one with a kind of death ice common in the necromancy school of magic in the universe. They are immune to normal weapons and chill anything that moves through them. Conan fought a devil beast in issue 30 of his Barbarian series in 1973. While they can't be killed, they are easily frightened off by holy symbols. They are attracted to and violently attack those without faith or those filled with fear. While not coming to Earth until long after the time of Conan in the 2300s, the fire vampires coming to us in the Donald Windry Cthulhu mythos story of the same name, in most cases, are far too powerful to include in your story as anything but gods. To the naked eye, the fire vampire's homeworld appears as a comet flying through space, but in truth, this flaming rock contains a hive mind of beings that desire the natural resources, memories, and very being of their victim planets, for both an unknowable purpose and their continued existence. This is done by engulfing certain areas of the world in a giant inferno of light and heat, taking what they need while often making demands on that same homeworld out of a fear of reprisals. While normal vampires are harmed by sunlight, these mountain-sized alien parasites are harmed by certain frequencies and electromagnetic waves. Since their main threat comes from their size, a simple reduction makes them far more manageable enemies. Cthulhu, the being these entities spawned from in the Hyborian Age, would be much farther away than it would be in the later 2300s of our time. For this reason, a much smaller entity about the size of a fist, or maybe person-sized rock, may have landed on Earth, causing a bit of manageable havoc for your adventuring party. The two named fire vampires we know of are Cthulhu, which is their parent, and Fthagua, who acts as their political leader, called a High Regent. This was a much richer or in-depth concept than I thought it would be, and while I thought the Aqueos would be my favorite part of making this video, the truth is the simple concept I really enjoyed here was how far a vampire sect of undead can separate themselves from a herd so long as they simply train one of their abilities. For this reason, I'd love to see what a sect of hyper-obsessive shapeshifters could do. Of course, the concept of Deep One vampires and fire vampires have their own natural level of weird enjoyment as well. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, you can find a detailed source list below to aid you in more research while listening to some fun stories right above those always extremely easy to use donation links. PayPal and Subscribestar are currently having technical issues, so Venmo is the preferred method at this time. Thanks again to our wonderful sponsor, the Bizarchives, which you can also find above the source list in our description box. Thank you for watching, and have a lovely night.